China, indoctrination, anger, controversy. Some time ago, I briefly touched on this topic on my old channel. Today, I want to explore it in more depth. Let me start by saying this. This is not about canceling Shinyu from tripleS or condemning her as a person. But when a public figure makes a political statement and does so with confidence, it must be open to critical reflection, especially if we consider ourselves leftist, progressive, or human rights oriented. Neutrality is not an option here. It's clear, Shinyu took a political stance. She affirmed the so-called One China policy, and that's exactly why we need to take a step back and ask, what does this policy actually mean? Only if we understand what the One China ideology truly represents, which imperial ambitions, selective historical interpretations, and authoritarian structures it is based on, can we grasp the gravity of such a statement. The idea that China has a rightful claim to Taiwan based on history is absolutely irrelevant. Historical cherry-picking doesn't justify authoritarian expansionism or repression. The only thing that legitimizes sovereignty is the will of the people, and the people of Taiwan have made their stance clear. China's alleged historical justification for its claim over Taiwan does not hold up as a valid basis for sovereignty in today's world. For anyone with progressive values, it should be obvious. A people striving for sovereignty has the right to self-determination and an independent state. Any argument that praises one country, two systems as a viable solution overlooks that in practice, it's a repressive formula, a political construct that beneath the surface severely restricts civil liberties and undermines democratic autonomy. The right to freedom, dignity, and democratic self-governance should never be negotiable. Any solution that disregards the will of the people in Taiwan is not peace, it's submission. No amount of historical narrative, no matter how forcefully asserted, can override the democratic aspirations of a politically autonomous society. Sovereignty should not be genuinely undermined by imperialist claims, no matter what ideological or historical justifications are invoked to legitimize domination. True political autonomy emerges from the collective will of the people, not from oppressive power structures. Any form of annexation, no matter how veiled under political artifices such as one country, two systems, is nothing but an instrument of imperialist oppression, violently negating and crushing the legitimate demands for sovereignty and self-determination of oppressed peoples. So, when someone affirms the One China policy, they are also affirming repression. And that's exactly what Shinyu did. Let's now take a closer look at what exactly Shinyu said. What kind of reproduction of authoritarian narratives are we dealing with here? This wasn't a reflex, a slip, or an uninformed mistake. She deliberately brought up the issue and was the catalyst for the conversation. She wasn't passive. She could have stayed silent, like many Chinese idols do, out of fear, diplomatic calculation, or self-protection. I understand that it's unfortunate idols are barely involved in political discourse. Still, silence is better than affirming narratives of repression. That's also why hardly anyone publicly negates it, because the consequences can be too severe. So I would have understood if Shinyu had remained silent, or if her statement had slipped out unintentionally. But she didn't stay silent. She was active. She made the statement willingly, and even doubled down when criticized. That was a clear political stance. Even if one were to argue she was affirming this out of fear, in this context, that argument simply doesn't hold up. Now, some might say, she grew up in China, she doesn't know any different. And that's true. Indoctrination is a central issue here, and one we need to address more thoroughly than I did in my first video. China is an authoritarian state where democratic participation is severely limited. Schools, media, and society shape a unified narrative of history, identity, and nationhood, deeply rooted in the One China ideology. People grow up with this worldview, internalized and systematically reinforced. And many people respond to that with understanding. They argue from a place of empathy, recognizing the role of indoctrination in China. That's understandable. But here's where I need to intervene. I've said this before, and I'll explain it more precisely today. Many people misinterpret or oversimplify the concept of indoctrination. It's important to also mention the role of so-called Red Scare propaganda. Many have a deeply distorted image of China, shaped by Western media and political narratives that portray China or any state with socialist characteristics as the ultimate threat. These narratives prevent realistic assessments of these countries and obscure how indoctrination actually works and how it differs from other forms of propaganda. When I ask those who are particularly sensitive to Shinyu's context how they assess the extent and nature of indoctrination in China, I often find their understanding doesn't align with reality. I can't debunk every facet of Red Scare propaganda in one video, but I want to at least raise awareness of how indoctrination in China actually functions. Why raise awareness? Because just like in the West, where right-wing populists and demagogues spread propaganda, China does the same, with the difference being many actively affirm that propaganda, but many also know it's exaggerated or false. The difference often lies in the form. While the West is experiencing a strong right-wing shift with visible leftist opposition, China lacks formal political opposition. But there's still natural negation, and don't let anyone claim this is lesser than organized leftist opposition. Generally, the West often mirrors the same issues, just in different forms. Let's talk about indoctrination itself. It's always contextual and varies by system. Extremely authoritarian regimes like North Korea enforce total ideological control, monopolizing every area of life and thought. China, however, uses more subtle but systematic tools. Education, media control, internet censorship, and social pressure all work together to reinforce a dominant narrative. Of course, the awareness of indoctrination differs by city tier, but I won't get into that here as it would only complicate the video without adding much to the argument. For context, Shinyu is, to my knowledge, from Beijing, a tier 1 city. I hope my point is clear. Shinyu is not less free than the rest of us. She has the same opportunity to educate herself politically. It would be wrong to dismiss her conscious affirmation of the One China policy simply as indoctrination and use that to excuse her political action. We must take a nuanced view. Indoctrination shapes people, but individuals still have agency, even in China. Shinyu made a conscious choice, and that matters politically. Now, there's only one point that speaks in Shinyu's favor, and for me, it's the only real reason to partially excuse her. It's very simple and trivial. Her age. Not many people get politically involved early and with clarity, and Shinyu is neither too young nor particularly old. It's trivial, but someone in their early 20s repeating conservative state-driven narratives is, while wrong, still understandable. That's why I think it's important not to downplay this. You can still like Shinyu, you can hope that one day she'll reflect more deeply on these topics, and you can hope that Nian, who is Taiwanese herself, might forgive her, or at least understand where Shinyu is coming from. To be clear, there's no indication Nian is upset with Shinyu, at least not that I know of. But this is exactly why we as fans and politically engaged individuals must stay focused. The One China policy is wrong, and those who actively affirm it are making a political statement. We shouldn't ignore or excuse that. We should take it seriously. Now, let's address something many people said after the old Shinyu video and the hot take poll. Many argued that OT23 and Shinyu should be removed from tripleS. I think even though the One China controversy didn't go viral, Modhouse probably did address it internally. They showed a somewhat progressive stance during the Burn release, which other artists like G-Dragon didn't. Still, Shinyu wasn't removed, or at least nothing's been confirmed. Do I agree with OT23? No. Am I against OT23? Also no. I was going to name another example for comparison, but let's skip that. It would spark a new discussion that deserves its own video. Had Modhouse removed Shinyu, I wouldn't have criticized it. I would have understood it. I actually think removing someone from a group due to a political statement can be justified once it crosses a certain line, and in this case, it clearly did. However, I also don't think it's tragic that she's still in the group. I don't believe Shinyu is inherently malicious. I don't even think she's regressive. To me, this was a complete misstep in political judgment, driven by a lack of interest in deeper reflection and a mistake tied to her age. So I don't affirm the OT23 stance, but I understand why people hold it and respect its legitimacy.